Sustainable development, from the definitions that are out there, generally speaks to development that allows present generations to utilize the resources that are available to us without compromising or depriving future generations. So to use our natural resources, our environment, and what is available to us in a sustainable manner means we're able to meet our current social, economic, and cultural needs without depriving future generations. And when we talk about our natural resources and what we have in place, we're talking about use of land, use of our water resources, use of our minerals. So what it means is that for our grandchildren, we mustn't take out all the copper, take out all the gold, use all the water, cut down all the trees, utilize all pieces of land, whether it is for agriculture or for building houses. And when we look at the legislation that we have in place in Zambia, we do have a number of pieces of legislation. We have the Constitution, we have environmental legislation, we've got planning legislation that is applied by Ministry of Local Government. We've got legislation to govern the use and utilization of our forests. And allow me to just speak about the Constitution, which is the supreme law in the country, which all legislation should abide by. Our current Constitution has got two unique features which should help us when we're discussing sustainable planning or sustainable development. We have a unique provision in the Constitution that contains citizens' responsibilities. And among these is protection of the environment and sustainable use of natural resources. Then we also have, I think, one of my favorite articles in the Constitution, Articles 8 and 9, which has national values and principles. And these include principles such as equity, social justice, non-discrimination, and sustainable development. And in everything that we do, in developing legislation, in applying the legislation, in implementing and developing government policy and programs, we are supposed to be guided by those. So if we are applying sustainable development as a principle, if we are applying non-discrimination as a principle, or equity, or social justice, what it means is there must be equal and equitable distribution of land. We must each get enough land for our use. If you think about it in Bible terms, when God gave manna, He said, take enough for you to use tonight. You take too much, it rots the following morning. The same thing with use of land, natural resources, enough for us to use today. If we cut down trees, we either cut them in such a manner that they can grow for the next generation, or with each tree I plant, I plant two.
Land is one of the greatest resources that Zambia has, with a total area of 752,610 kilometers squared. It can be defined as a system that comprises soil, vegetation, other biota, and the ecological and hydrological processes that operate within the system. Land is important to us because it forms the basis of our social, cultural, and economic life. For instance, the construction of houses and businesses, traditional ceremonies, agriculture, mining, and wildlife tourism all have one thing in common. They are carried out on land. While land is incredibly useful to humans, our endeavor to develop as communities and nations has brought about undesirable side effects such as loss of biodiversity, vegetation destruction, deforestation, soil erosion, water scarcity, and other environmental problems. It has contributed to increased incidences of adverse climate change impacts such as droughts, floods, and extreme temperatures. To prevent, reduce, and mitigate the harmful effects of land use, the government has embarked on the process of mainstreaming the principle of sustainable land management in law, policy, and programs. This principle requires that land, including soils, water, animals, and plants, are used to meet human needs while simultaneously ensuring the long-term productive potential of these processes and the maintenance of their environmental functions. Sustainable land management is implemented by the process of urban planning. Urban planning in Zambia is regulated by several policies and legislation. Some of them are as follows. National policy is the blueprint that the government uses to achieve its commitments to citizens. There are several strategies that the government has employed to prevent and mitigate the harmful effects of land use, one of which is the enactment of legislation. The key policies that have inspired legislation to promote the principle of sustainable land management include 8 National Development Plan, the Vision 2030, the National Policy on Wetlands, the National Lands Policy, the Participatory Slum Upgrading Policy, and the National Policy on Environment. The government recognizes in the 8th National Development Plan that land use is imperative to national development. The plan, for instance, promotes the use of land through agriculture as it is a significant source of employment, with 57% of the Zambian population being employed in the sector. Other forms of land use promoted in the plan include the exploitation of minerals, which has been the main driver of the Zambian economy, contributing about 10% towards the gross domestic product, and the management of water resources, as hydroelectricity, which is produced from the country's water bodies, constitutes 85% of Zambia's electricity generation pool. The 8th National Development Plan further recognizes that equal access to land plays a role in addressing problems faced by the most vulnerable members of our society by facilitating their access to basic rights such as clean water, shelter, and food. The law is an instrument of policy and the means by which the government ensures sustainable urban planning. It codifies rules on the development and enforcement of planning regulations. It encourages citizen participation in the protection of the environment and provides for the protection and conservation of the environment and the sustainable management of the use of natural resources. The legislation includes the Constitution of Zambia, Chapter 1 of the Laws of Zambia. Article 255 of the Constitution provides that the person responsible for polluting or degrading the environment is responsible for paying for the damage done to the environment. This is commonly referred to as the polluter pays principle. Despite the constitutional provisions and the provisions in the Mines and Minerals Development Act, there is in Zambia legacy mining pollution as a result of many decades of unsustainable mining operations and inadequate rehabilitation of closure of mining sites. In the Copperbelt province, townships adjacent to copper mining sites are severely polluted, while in the old mining town of Kabwe, there are unacceptably high levels of lead in the soil. It has been argued that the polluter pays principle, which has been ingrained in the Constitution and mining legislation, is an effective tool of ensuring remediation, but is unable to comprehensively address damage to the environment. The Act provides for the establishment of an integrated local government system and gives effect to the decentralization of functions, responsibilities, and services at all local government levels. The Act also ensures democratic participation in and controls decision-making by people at the local level. It also prohibits and controls the development and use of land and buildings and the erection of buildings in the interest of public health, public safety, and the proper and orderly development of the area of the local authority. This Act provides for the development, planning, and administration principles, standards, and requirements of urban and regional planning processes and systems. It also ensures sustainable urban and rural development by promoting environmental, social, and economic sustainability in development initiatives and controls at all levels of urban and regional planning. However, the Act makes no specific reference to climate change. This is undesirable because the unsustainable use of land has contributed to climate change, which is being experienced in the reduction of rainfall and the increase in average temperatures, thereby justifying climate change as a matter of importance in the development of a responsive integrated development plan. The Act makes provision for integrated environmental management, the protection and conservation of the environment, and the sustainable management and use of natural resources related matters. This means that the Act should inform the integrated development plan established under the Urban and Regional Planning Act. Section 29 of the Act, which requires approval of a project by the Zambia Environmental Management Agency after an environmental impact assessment is conducted. These projects can include housing development projects. This is critical because real estate development has substantial direct and indirect impacts on the environment and is regarded as a major source of pollution, as conventional development has tended to be insensitive to the natural environment. Despite Section 29, areas such as Salama Park, East Park, Marshlands, Chalala, Ndeke-Vona Valley, Kalikiliki Dam, which were recharge points, have been constructed over, resulting in drying aquifers and flooding in the city during the rain season. The Act provides for the establishment and declaration of national forests, local forests, joint forest management areas, botanical reserves, private forests, and community forests. The Act encourages the participation of local communities, local authorities, traditional institutions, non-governmental organizations, and other stakeholders to maintain sustainable forest management. Section 10 of the Act states that the President may, by statutory instrument, declare any area of land within the Republic to be a national forest and may, in like manner, declare that any national forest shall cease to be a national forest or that the boundaries of any national forest shall be altered or extended. A similar provision exists for the declaration of a local forest in Section 27. It can be observed that the forests have been degazetted to allow for the construction of state institutions, businesses, and homes to the detriment of the environment. This is in part because of the wide discretionary powers brought about by the non-prescription of the factors that should be taken into consideration in degazetting a forest. The country has been successful in adopting best practices established by developed countries, such as laws, policies, systems, and structures. However, despite the government's prioritization of sustainable development, evidenced by the implementation of urban planning, the country faces several environmental drawbacks. Some of these issues highlighted include the construction of homes and businesses on wetlands contributing to flooding and the destruction of aquatic and terrestrial lives. A lot of the urban population has been absorbed into unplanned settlements known as compounds, which do not have access to sanitation services provided by the state. The use of pit latrines and the lack of waste management services in these settlements have contributed to the contamination of groundwater, leading to waterborne diseases. The sporadic emergence of filling stations within urban areas such as Lusaka and Kitwe has been a cause of concern for residents, especially where these are located within neighborhoods. The concerns include air pollution, fire hazards, traffic accidents, and congestion. And there are open treatment ponds and dump sites located within residential neighborhoods. A clear indication that implementation in urban planning may require enhancement. Some of the key questions that need to be considered in this regard include: what are the successes and challenges relating to urban planning? In consideration of the multiple pieces of legislation developed to support sustainable land management, does the problem lie in the content of the legislation or its enforcement? In consideration of the cross-cutting nature of sustainable land management, is there sufficient coordination and collaboration between the relevant institutions? How do we strike a balance between development and the need to protect the environment? What is the role of an ordinary person with regard to urban planning, and is there adequate citizen participation in urban planning? The Zambia Law Development Commission is a semi-autonomous statutory body established under the Zambia Law Development Commission Act, Chapter 32 of the Laws of Zambia. The Commission's primary mandate is to make recommendations of the revision and reform of the law in Zambia. The Commission is also mandated to hold legal seminars and conferences on legal issues such as sustainable urban planning, planning our cities for future generations.